What if I told you that practically everything you've ever been told about death is a lie? You've been kept in the dark, suffering unnecessary confusion and fear. Well, it's time for you to know the truth. In this video, I'm going to tell you what really happens when you die. This is everything about death I've learned as a channel for Source and the Council of Light. And let me be clear right up front, we never really die. We just transition to a new state of being. In fact, there are two distinct processes that take place after physical death, and it's really important to understand both of them because they involve different aspects of who we are. The first process concerns the incarnated soul, the immortal part of you which powers your human avatar and incarnates in life after life so it can learn. It's just one part of the human avatar which is made up of the soul, the body, the ego, and the higher self. It's also just a fragment of a much larger soul that resides in the higher dimensions. We call this the oversoul. Your little fragment of soul returns to the oversoul and the upper reaches of the universe after physical death, before entering its next incarnation. The second process involves a version of you transitioning to the higher dimensions after the body dies, in energy form. When I say you, I mean the unique human avatar which has lived this particular life. You're a one-off. The energy version of you which crosses into the higher dimensions after physical death is known as a spirit and won't reincarnate. However, it will live an immortal existence in the afterlife. So you can see, souls and spirits are not the same thing, even though we often use the terms interchangeably in this dimension. In fact, it's really important to understand these terms separately. They refer to two different types of entities with different purposes and different journeys. I'm going to explain what happens to each when you die in detail, starting with the incarnated soul. But first, let's be clear about what a soul actually is. A soul is an immortal consciousness, part of the collective consciousness, which we can understand as Athena or source energy. Its entire purpose is to become the best version of itself it can possibly be, and it does this through learning, both in the higher dimensions and through many, many incarnations. These incarnations can take place on Earth or on other planets. They may be in human form or in the shape of an animal, plant, or even an object. Now that last part might sound strange, but stay with me. You know how a car can sometimes seem to have a personality? That's because a soul has chosen to inhabit it, so it can experience what it's like to be a car, at least for a while, as well as taking many different forms, often at the same time. In addition, a soul might be incarnated in multiple dimensions simultaneously. There are 5 live game environments, which all exist in dimensions of their own. These are environments which are structured around time, follow storylines, and take place in an historical context, although it feels like the present to us when we're down here. We created these environments ourselves, as places where we could come and learn and have experiences. We also gamified these dimensions, which is why I describe them as live game environments. They are part of the game of life. So a soul might be incarnated on this earth in this dimension, or another earth in another dimension. In fact, most souls are typically incarnated in all game dimensions at once, in multiple lives, unless they're very young. So we're truly multidimensional beings, even though we're not usually consciously aware of it while we're incarnated. These incarnations in the live game environments are like field trips. We leave our homes, friends, and families in the higher dimensions, although we remain connected to them through our intuition and psychic senses. When a soul returns from an incarnation after physical death, there's a great celebration. We reunite with our loved ones who have been watching our progress throughout our life, even if we weren't aware of it. The place we return to is heaven, and yes, it's a real place. Souls and spirits live together in the heavenly dimension, which looks a lot like this dimension in many ways. In heaven, there's an Earth-type planet, and also many other planets, just like in our universe. This is one reason why we say, as above, so below. Souls can live on any one of these planets in their normal lives in heaven, and certain branches of the soul family tree tend to congregate in certain places. Actually, the source of memories of being a starseed comes from this. Starseeds come from an alien-type planet based in heaven and remember living in that alien form between incarnated lives. Souls are balls of pure energy, but we often choose to take holographic form when we're in the higher dimensions. So if we live on an Earth-type planet, we may use a holographic human form. If we live on what we would think of as an alien planet, then we may use an alien form. We may also change our form from time to time, or use different forms for different purposes. For example, if we're a senior member of the Council of Light, we may use a ceremonial form for big occasions, or we may present ourselves differently to different entities depending on their frame of reference. When a soul leaves an earthly incarnation, one of the first things we do is conduct a debrief of our experience. We examine what we learned, what we could have done better, and how best to move forward into our next incarnation. Generally speaking, we plan a few incarnations ahead, so we probably already know which life we're going to be born into next, or we may have a handful of options on the table. But there's no rush. It's entirely up to every individual soul how they choose to take their learning journey and in what time frame. Some souls like to leap straight back into a life. Others prefer to wait a while, perhaps honing their skills in the higher dimensions. There, we have practice environments, a vast library where we can experience other souls' lives, almost as though we lived them ourselves, and mentors and teachers to guide us. If a soul returns from a particularly difficult life, it may need to take time for healing. In the higher dimensions, sound and light healing is used to repair and reset the energetic field. A soul may also use affirmations and visualizations to adjust ideas and behaviors it picked up during a life which it doesn't want to hold on to. These healing techniques work both in the higher dimensions as well as down here in 3D, so this is another reason we say, as above, so below. In between lives, a soul can choose to do many things. Of course, they will want to spend time with friends and family, and there are lots of recreational activities in heaven, including team sports. Many souls also have passionate interests in particular areas of skill or study, so may spend time enjoying these before they decide to descend back into a body. So that's the journey of the soul after death. But what about spirits? What happens when you die as an individual human being, as the person you've been in this lifetime? You can find lots of accounts of the transition from a human physical form into spirit form in accounts of near-death experiences, or NDEs. I can recommend Dr. Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, if you'd like to find out more about this from people who've temporarily crossed over. There are lots of common factors reported by people who've had these experiences. Here are 5 of the most commonly reported ones. The first is a sensation of leaving the body and floating away, often observing the human remains from above and feeling a sense of detachment. The second is a release from pain and a feeling of overwhelming peace and love. This happens because the physical body operates at a lower vibrational rate than the spirit form. As our vibration increases, the more bliss we feel. The third commonly reported experience is moving through a tunnel toward a bright light. This marks the journey from this dimension to heaven. The fourth is meeting deceased loved ones and/or spiritual beings. We rarely leave a physical incarnation alone. Guides and departed loved ones accompany us on the journey, often starting to appear at a dying person's bedside in the final days of physical life. The fifth experience is having a panoramic life review. This is a highly reported phenomenon of people who have had near-death experiences. A life review is when people are shown key moments from their lives by a benevolent being, and so are able to understand their impact on others. It's not about judgment, but about gaining insight into how their choices and actions shaped their relationships and experiences. Once the spirit has progressed through the life review, it enters heaven. How it experiences this depends on lots of things. For example, where it came from on earth, what kind of life it lived, and its age at the time of death. Some people experience a place which feels very familiar to them. Others have a more otherworldly experience. Many people who temporarily crossed over during an NDE describe how everything seems brighter, more vivid, and more real in heaven than it does down here. The same is reported by users of psychedelic tools who are similarly accessing the higher dimensions. Whatever heaven looks like to an individual spirit, there will always be friends, family, and guides to look after it as it gets used to its new surroundings. In a spirit's early days in heaven, two main things happen. The first is that it goes through a period of learning to understand how the universe really works, what it is, what heaven is, and how soul society functions. This learning takes place very quickly because in the higher dimensions we can absorb information instantly. A spirit is also assigned teachers and mentors who can answer its questions and help its understanding. The second thing that happens is that spirits go through a healing process, much as souls do. However, spirits generally have more healing to do than souls because ideas acquired by the ego during its lifetime can have a strong hold. So they are taught to view themselves with compassion and to forgive themselves for the things they've done. They also learn to forgive others for things done to them during their life. That's one reason spirits contact the living through mediums in this dimension, to forgive and release karmic bonds, which can bring peace to both the living and the spirit. All spirits retain at least part of their ego after transition, because this is the thing that makes us us. All spirits and souls from the beginning of time have a unique energetic fingerprint so that they can be told apart. However, the ego realigns during the learning and healing processes as it comes to understand that it's not just an individual human, but part of something much larger and more spiritual. Some egos take to this idea quickly, others need more time. This depends on a couple of factors. First, how highly evolved the soul was which animated the human avatar during its lifetime. Older souls tend to be naturally more spiritual during their incarnations, although not always. Second, how spiritual or religious the spirit was during its time as a human being. If it already believed in heaven and the afterlife, then it's easier for the ego to adjust. You may be wondering about babies and children who pass over and what happens when they die. These types of spirits get extra special care. As they heal, they also start to grow up. As a natural medium, I communicate with many spirits, and I'm aware of one who died during birth but is now 21 years old in heaven. She tells me she has lived a relatively normal life, going through school and learning new skills. Of course, these skills aren't the same skills we need down here. Spirits learn all sorts of things which are particular to the higher dimensions. One of the things they learn when they reach a certain level of maturity is how to guide human beings on Earth. This is why we often have the sense of a deceased family member looking after us once they've passed, because they actually are. Similarly, I coach many very highly evolved souls, the majority of whom are bodhisattvas, and they often tell me that they're being guided by famous people. They often wonder if this can really be true, and I always assure them it is. I myself am guided periodically by David Bowie, Prince, Amy Winehouse, and Marilyn Monroe. These kinds of very famous people almost always have very highly evolved souls, which means that when they pass over, they learn very quickly and can progress to a very high level of consciousness. They often then choose to act as guides for other highly evolved souls who are incarnated to help them with their missions. Once spirits have settled into their new lives on the other side, they can choose to learn particular skills or to devote themselves to particular areas of study. For example, they may choose to learn how to enter dreams and communicate with living humans, or how to manifest signs in the earthly dimension. Or they may become interested in a topic such as the way the human avatar interacts with the higher dimensions, or the history of the game of life. They could also just choose to continue whatever they were studying while they were incarnated, but with the benefit of new knowledge and a greater intellect. And yes, you heard that right. Our IQ increases after physical death. Spirits also take up or continue creative pursuits. When we have the idea of Elvis, Mozart, and Aretha Franklin jamming together in heaven, it's not fiction, it's fact. Artists, composers, writers, philosophers, scientists, they find their tribe in heaven and frequently collaborate and continue to create new works. And here's where it gets really interesting. All of the spirits ever generated by a single soul often become friends, thinking of each other as another type of family. So David Bowie and the poet Baudelaire, who shared a soul, are friends in the afterlife. Same with Elvis Presley and James Dean, Amy Winehouse and Billie Holiday, Prince and Mozart. Often artists create new works in heaven so they can be channeled down to earth via an incarnated soul. Many great artists living on Earth report the sense of not being themselves during the act of creation or feeling something flow through them. In fact, Madonna talks about this explicitly in her recent interview on Jay Shetty's podcast, if you want to check it out. Creation in the third dimension is very much a collaboration with entities in the higher dimensions. And in fact, heaven is an intensely creative and vibrant place, and there is always something new to discover or take part in for a spirit who has passed over. Having said that, it's entirely up to the individual spirit how they want to live their afterlife. Some just want a peaceful existence and to potter in their heavenly garden, like my maternal grandfather. Others want to fully embrace the opportunities the higher dimensions offer and throw themselves into them with gusto. This partly depends on the profile of the soul that drove the avatar, which branch of the soul family tree it descended from and its seniority, and also the personality of the ego attached to the individual spirit. There's no right or wrong. We can view the glorious afterlife as the reward given to the ego for helping the soul learn during its incarnation. After all, the soul chooses its life, but the ego cannot. It's brought into existence with the birth of a human baby, and until recently, most egos never have any idea that they're part of a system being powered by an immortal soul. That's changing now, thanks to the wave of spiritual awakenings taking place across the world. Spirits tend to maintain a close relationship with the soul that animated them in their human life. Not always, but nearly always. In addition, they find they have a soul family as well as a human family and can form close bonds with these entities. Another great feature of the afterlife is that it's perfectly possible to meet your heroes, no matter what period of history they lived in. Spirits and souls are able to simultaneously exist in many places at once, so there's no limit on time that can be spent together. And in fact, there's no time in heaven, just a state of bliss and being, and the opportunity to have as many experiences as you choose. Like souls, spirits choose how they want to look in heaven, although most stick with something approximating their physical incarnation. However, they often choose to look like a version of their younger self, which is why people who have NDEs often report seeing, for example, their grandfather, but as he was when he was a young man. They may also often choose to fix aspects of their physical form, having a whole, fit, holographic body, rather than holding on to injuries or disabilities. Now, many people ask me about pets, so let me address what happens to animals when they pass over into the afterlife. Just like humans, animals are powered by souls and pass into heaven on physical death. So it's absolutely true you'll be reunited with beloved pets when you transition. They go through their own version of the healing and learning processes I talked about earlier and have their own opportunities to grow and experience different things. They can also talk, meaning that human spirits and animal spirits can freely communicate, which is a wonderful thing. Now, while most people have an easy and beautiful transition after death, sometimes an unhappy spirit can get stuck on the earthly plane. We call these spirits ghosts. This can happen when they're overly attached to a person or a place, or if they're carrying heavy negative emotions like a desire for revenge or to set the record straight. These types of spirits can be released from the earthly plane, and there are souls and spirits whose work this is. They can also be released by humans on this plane who have special skills. Or sometimes they just reach a point in their evolution where they're ready to let go. No matter how the transition takes place, for all beings, physical death is not the end. It's just the passing into a new immortal state which presents bountiful opportunities to learn, grow, experience, and enjoy. Our human lives are incredibly short compared to the long and fruitful afterlife, which means death is not to be feared, but to be embraced. When you die, you're not ending. You're beginning the most extraordinary adventure, reuniting with loved ones, discovering your true nature, and stepping into a dimension of infinite possibility and creativity. Whether you're returning as a soul to plan your next incarnation or settling into your new and exciting existence as a spirit, heaven is waiting with open arms. And that is what happens when you die.